Hello and welcome, 2D Gamer back again with 5 more PS1 games to play. Played the filler footage of the Misadventures of Tron, Bonne, which with its varied mission types, action, puzzle, and RPG, making for a unique and fun experience all triple coated with cuteness and charm, is definitely a PS1 game worth playing. The only problem I have, and the major problem that is going to prevent me from featuring this Mega Man Legends offshoot any further other than this short footage here, is the outright absurd asking price for this game from online sellers. I was lucky enough to get this one brand new for cheap, about 15 years ago for maybe about $15. But though it is a good game, I don't feel I can feature it due to its asking price alone. Now back to the regularly scheduled video. If you've watched the first 3 videos in this series, you already know that this is not a top 5 PS1 games video, but 5 games in a much larger list of games worth playing on the original PlayStation. Command & Conquer Red Alert Retaliation is the third and final PC to PS1 port in the Command & Conquer series, and was the $20 brand new buy that introduced me to the series altogether. Retaliation is a standalone version of both Counter-Strike and The Aftermath expansions for the PC version of Red Alert. If you are unfamiliar with the series, Command & Conquer is a real-time strategy game, which means it's all about war. Players gather and refine a natural resource simply known as ore, in order to fund the building of things like barracks, factories, and military tech research buildings, all in a plan to build an army big enough and use advanced tactics well enough to destroy your enemies. It's a simple sounding premise, kill the other guy, but with nearly stupid amount of depth to its gameplay. This game is addictive and will steal many hours away from you. The biggest time thief for me in Retaliation has always been the skirmish mode, or the multiplayer mode, where you can play against up to 4 computer-controlled opponents on over 100 different maps. And we 5 original PlayStation owners who own a link cable can even play against friends, provided that you have 2 original PlayStation systems that are old enough models to still have the later phased out of the design link cable port, 2 TVs, and since Retaliation comes with 2 standalone discs, one for the Allied single-player missions and the other for the Soviets, 1 complete copy of the game. The 34 single-player missions are split between the Allied disc and the Soviet disc, each with their own individual missions. World War II never happened. Hitler never rose to power. Instead, Comrade Stalin's forces have stormed Europe, forcing the Allied forces to fight to keep the Soviets from taking over Fortress Europa. Command & Conquer presents an altered version of the events of history. Beating the single-player missions even unlocks a secret mode where you face off against giant ants. The visuals are all 2-dimensional sprites, and sprites not being the PlayStation's biggest strength means, as you build more and more, and the enemies do as well, the game can slow down quite a lot. However, sometimes the game slowing down can be used as a clue that the enemy is mobilizing against you. When the game slows down suddenly, in skirmish mode or in the missions, get your base prepared for an attack. While slowdown can be a death sentence for many games, it does not hamper the experience in Retaliation, and even comes in handy at times. The game can still handle a lot before it slows down, and as you kill more of the enemy, it speeds back up.
training.
The music is well made as well, sometimes soothing, sometimes upbeat, and very fitting for a game where you may spend hours locked into battle at a time. The tracks may not stand out or be memorable, but they do not need to be in a game like this. They stay nicely in the background and add to the experience. As you may imagine, controlling a real-time strategy game with the PlayStation controller does have a bit of a learning curve to it. Games like these are what the PS1 mouse controller was designed for, and using the mouse is the ideal way to play. However, I have never had a PS1 mouse, and as overpriced as they are online nowadays, will probably never pick one up. My experience with the PS1 version has always been using the controller to control the game. And while it does take a while to get used to, controlling with the D-pad, once you get the hang of it, the game controls wonderfully. While the mouse is the ideal way to play, you still won't miss a step using the PS1's controller. Overall, while the PC versions of Command & Conquer are easier to get your hands on nowadays, I myself own the First Decade collection for the PC. The PS1 version of Retaliation is still worth getting your hands on if you're still interested in collecting for the PS1. It will eat hours of time away from you, but you won't regret spending the time with it. If you own a PS1 mouse or a PS1 link cable as well, Retaliation is another very good reason to put them to use. And if Retaliation interests you, or you already own it, here are two similar suggestions that are also worth a look. One look at the average review scores for Dune 2000 may lead you to believe that this was a terrible game. However, this 1999 update to Westwood's own granddaddy of them all, Dune, released on the computer and Sega Genesis, has the same addictive playstyle as Command & Conquer. Dune feels a little more sluggish than Command & Conquer in its play, but still has the same addictive formula found in the original Dune and carried over to the C&C series. If you are Command & Conquered out, Dune won't do much for you, but seriously, can a game where Gimli himself preps you for missions be as bad as the reviews make it out to be? I think not. This one also has a PC version. Long before Warcraft was a world, it was one of the best real-time strategy series around. And this 1997 port to the PlayStation, though it pales in comparison to the PC version, still maintains the same addictive formula as the PC original. No map editor, no network play, and slowdown abounds as well. The default D-pad controls also do not feel quite as tight as Command & Conquer's do. However, all that aside, even in a flawed form, Warcraft 2 is still as addictive as ever, and definitely worth a look for PS1 gamers. Final Fantasy Anthology combines two classic Super Nintendo Final Fantasy games into one collectible package, and even throws in a bonus music CD and new CGI intro and ending videos for good measure. Prior to Anthology's release, North American gamers had never had the opportunity to play Final Fantasy V, outside of a Japanese import and a translation guide for those who can't read Japanese. 5 follows the adventures of 4 heroes on their quest to find and defend 4 crystals, earth, fire, wind, water, from an ancient evil. 5's most popular feature is that it uses the job system. Players can equip various jobs onto their characters, like White Mage, Black Mage, Ninja, Thief, and etc., to learn different abilities. players can swap each character in and out of any job as they please, and the job system allows you to customize each character as you see fit, as any skills they learn when they have a job equipped, they learn for good. The fights in Final Fantasy VI, for some inexplicable reason, suffer from slowdown. Being a Super Nintendo to PS1 port, this seems inexcusable. However, slowdown aside, not only is Final Fantasy VI my favorite Final Fantasy by far, it's also my personal favorite game of all time, and a little slowdown in the PS1 port does not stop it from shining. Plus, I no longer have to fret the day when my Super Nintendo version of the game, brought to the market in America as Final Fantasy III, no longer holds a battery save. Not that I still won't try to replace the battery when it finally dies on my cartridge, but having the Anthology port means I can still enjoy what is, in my opinion, Squaresoft's best game. I won't monopolize this video going into everything I like about Final Fantasy VI. That would take too long and you would probably be bored to tears after I finished. But believe me, this is as cinematic and epic as 16-bit RPGs get. Just racking my mind to remember everything this game has to offer is daunting. So instead, I will quickly touch on a couple of my favorite things about the game. Though the most likely candidate would probably be Terra if I had to wager a guess. Final Fantasy VI does not actually have a lead character. Throughout the game, you get the feeling that all the characters together make up the lead character. Outside of a few fringe party members like a Sam Squanch and a man with an identity crisis, every character has a deeply developed backstory and plays an integral part in the game's story narrative. By the end of the game, you know all the characters' backgrounds and the journey they took to get there. All the main characters are the main character for a portion of the game. You know them all, you identify with them all, and the game wouldn't be as good if even one of them was not there. There are so many high points in the game that when people say the opera scene is the most memorable scene, as memorable as it is, they do not do it justice. What about the death of Cyan's family and the Phantom Train? What about the Esper world? What about the death of General Leo? The end of the world which reshapes the entire overworld map? What about discovering the secret storyline segment where you find out that Shadow is Realm's... Oh wait, that's a secret. The whole storyline really is about all of them as a journey to stop Kefka from obtaining godlike power. Another aspect that makes this game great for me is the fact that every character has their own unique personal abilities. They all learn the same magic and have the chance to have the same abilities through the relic system. However, each character has their own defining attacks that give each one their own battle identities. Unlike the materia system, the job system, and even the sphere grid, where everyone in your party can eventually have every ability that everyone else does, thus stripping your characters of any uniqueness in battle, Final Fantasy VI keeps the individuality of each character alive in their own separate unique abilities. Sabin's blitzes are my favorite. Cyan's sword techniques are devastating. Edgar's tools, Strago's lures, Celeste's runic, Realm's sketches, Yumaro's crazy uncontrollability, and etc. Each character has their own unique abilities that set each of them apart and build onto the feeling of individuality that is presented in the game's story narrative as well. The ability to have your character have all the same abilities is nice, but I've always liked the feeling of individualism presented in Final Fantasy VI over the other systems in most of the other Final Fantasy games. Overall, despite some bad optimization in Final Fantasy VI, Final Fantasy Anthology is definitely worth adding to your collection. Squaresoft of the 16-bit era is my personal favorite Squaresoft, though they've always made amazing RPGs in all eras of gaming, including their other PS1 efforts. And Final Fantasy Anthology is a must-have for PS1 RPG enthusiasts. And if Final Fantasy Anthology interests you, here are two similar suggestions. How could anyone talk about Squaresoft's 16-bit efforts without mentioning Final Fantasy IV, ported to America as Final Fantasy II, and Squaresoft's other, possibly greatest 16-bit effort, Chrono Trigger? Final Fantasy IV follows the story of Cecil in a story of redemption, war, and spoony barbs. Chrono Trigger, a game that I missed the opportunity to pick up on the Super Nintendo, follows the story of Chrono on a quest through time to stop an evil wizard. This port of Chrono Trigger also has some inexplicable slowdown in it, but as someone who missed owning it on the Super Nintendo, a little slowdown has never bothered me from enjoying this tried and true 16-bit classic. Admit it, you thought I was going to say Final Fantasy Origins to complete the set. Instead, I chose another classic 16-bit RPG in Lunar Silver Star Story Complete. Lunar first appeared on Sega's ill-fated Sega CD add-on, and this PS1 port is sort of the final director's cut of Working Design's classic musical RPG. The cutscenes have been revamped, more enemies have been added, and there have been some changes to the storyline as well. Having not played either the Sega CD version or the Saturn version, I cannot comment on how the PS1 port stacks up to each of those, nor do I know which version is considered the fan favorite. I do know that this 16-bit port is definitely worth a look, especially if you can spring for the entire collector's set version. Special edition games with extras are a normal occurrence in today's gaming world, but in 1999, Lunar's packaging of extra collectibles with the game was almost unheard of. I only have the game, making of disc, and the music CD for my copy, but I did manage to get Lunar 2 complete with everything. And if you like Lunar, then picking up Lunar 2 goes without saying. If you are anything like me, golf is a sport that has never appealed to you. Hot Shots Golf is an incredibly addictive golf simulation, whose goofy, big-headed characters give it a charm that makes Hot Shots Golf stand as a game for everyone. In fact, the Japanese name for it is Everybody's Golf. Hot Shots was the very first golf game I ever partook in, and who knew that simulation golf would make for such a fun game? In playing this footage, I realized that my video game golf swing is incredibly rusty, and the computer opponents mop the floor with me every time. I need to practice up if I even want a chance to unlock all 6 courses and 10 playable characters in the game. I did, however, do pretty good at the 18 holes of mini golf also provided in Hot Shots. Don't let the word golf simulation prevent you from experiencing this incredibly addictive game. Play by yourself, or invite a few friends over for up to 4-player multiplayer competition. Even if you're terrible at the game, like I am, you will still have a great time playing this addictive game. And for Nintendo 64 owners, if Hot Shots looks strikingly similar to Mario Golf, it's because the developers of Hot Shots Golf, Camelot, would later go on to make Mario Golf on the Nintendo 64. And they have the same addictive play mechanics. Nice on.
Nice in.
Graphically, the fully polygonal courses look nice, if a bit rough, and the 2-dimensional sprite characters are well animated. The controls are spot on, and learning how to use the power gauge is a cinch. The biggest learning curve you will have has to do with the technical aspects of golf itself. The golf sounds and background sounds of the courses are relaxing and soothing. There is an option to turn on music, but whatever you do, don't play it, as the music is annoying. And in deciding on two similar suggestions that go with Hot Shots Golf, I went with two other sports games with a much wider appeal to people who would not normally play sports games. In other words, midway games. If you're like me, your main experience with NBA Jam was that of playing it on a 16-bit console. The Sega Genesis version of Tournament Edition being my main experience with the game. However, the PS1 did get an amazing port of the game as well. A friend picked this one up for me, complete in the long box. And it took me a little time to get used to the PS1 version, being used to years of playing the Genesis version. Though I've quickly come to appreciate what is possibly the best home port of the game. Is the PS1 port arcade perfect? I don't really know, seeing as I've only played the arcade version once in my life and do not remember it. However, this is a darn good game no matter what version you play, and the PS1 version is definitely worth picking up if you're a fan of the formula. Every copy of John Madden Football I own has been given to me for free. I've never been a sports gamer, and I've especially never been a football simulation player. However, NFL Blitz is one fun game of pigskin that even appeals to non-sports gamers like myself. Fast-paced, in-your-face football action with leg drops, 30 yards for a first down, a simplified playbook, and pure arcade fun. The formula may have been worn down over time, but for those new to Blitz, or those who have been away from it long enough for it to be fun again, look into NFL Blitz. Remember when EA didn't monopolize the NFL license? For many years, I foolishly avoided Star Wars Dark Forces on the PS1 due to the poor reviews it received. What can I say? Even I was influenced by the gaming media at one time, and missed out on a lot of really good games because of it. While the PS1 port of Dark Forces has its problems, especially when compared to the PC original, but that could be said of all console ports of PC games, it is still an enjoyable game overall. Think Doom with the Star Wars skin thrown over it, and you sort of get the idea. Dark Forces is strictly old-school first-person shooter action. If old first-person shooter games do not appeal to you, then Dark Forces won't be a game to change your mind on the matter. However, if you still enjoy games like Doom and Duke 3D, then Dark Forces will be right up your alley, especially if you're a Star Wars fan. In Dark Forces, you play as Kyle Katarn, a mercenary hired by the Rebel Alliance to steal the infamous Death Star plans, but soon gets pulled into a plot to stop the Emperor's new secret weapon, the Dark Trooper. As in Doom, you blast your way through hordes of 2D sprite-based enemies in large, intricately designed 3D environments, with an assorted arsenal of weapons, some pulled straight from the Star Wars movies, like the Stormtrooper rifle and thermal detonators. The core gameplay is very similar to Doom, but the sheer size of the levels in Dark Forces set it apart for their time. They would have been massive, and are still impressive considering the drawbacks of the PS1's hardware. Just when you think you've seen everything a level has to offer, you find a whole new, sometimes large, hidden area to explore. These expansive and elaborately designed levels, chock full of baddies and hidden areas, however, do come at a price. The biggest complaint against the PS1 port job is the frame rate, and the downgraded blocky graphics. While the frame rate does dip quite heavily at times in the game, usually when there's a lot of action on screen. Dark Forces never turns into an unplayable slideshow. In fact, the frame rate usually runs at a playable level, but there are parts of the game where it bogs down a lot. It's not a horrible problem as some of the professional reviews insist, but it is notable at times. The blocky and blurry graphics can't be helped, even when playing on a PS2 with texture smoothing on. There's little difference. The graphics are just not that pretty. It's hard to distinguish enemies from afar at first, and the enemy sprites and textures are pixelated and ugly, even by PS1 standards. However, it's not as though we still play original PS1 games for their visuals anyway. That being said, Dark Forces being an early 3D game can cause motion sickness due to the blocky and blurry visuals and inconsistent frame rate. You can turn the head bob off in the options menu, and this may help a little. But I do have a friend who once actually got physically sick from playing this game. The controls in the game take some getting used to. This game was made pre-DualShock, so all movement is done with the D-pad. This too will turn off some more modern gamers who have since lost the calluses required for D-pad use. Your left thumb will ache at first.
You've all been spoiled by analog sticks, I tell you, back in my day.
If you've kept your D-pad thumb strong, this won't be a problem. The controls overall have a tough learning curve at first, or a tough unlearning curve if you're used to more modern FPS games. But if you take the time to learn them, they become second nature after a while. It's not the most well-conceived control scheme in FPS history, but it works well enough for what you need it to do in the game. And that's all that really matters. The music in the game is so-so. Instead of using the PS1 CD quality sound to give gamers the official symphonic Star Wars themes, the soundtrack is instead made up of MIDI compositions. This is a little disappointing whenever you consider how easily the PS1 could have handled the real tunes. The rest of the sound, however, is great, from the authentic blaster sounds to the cries of the enemies. The rest of the sound in the game is spot on, and the MIDI compositions still work well enough not to hurt the sound overall. Star Wars Dark Forces is a fun and completely playable port of the PC original. If you're a PS1 owner who's looking for a well-made Doom-style romp, then give Dark Forces a try. It's not perfect and can be disorienting to some gamers, but it's overall a very well-designed game. And if Dark Forces interests you, here are two similar suggestions that may also be worth a look. Speaking of a popular sci-fi movie series being turned into a Doom-esque first-person shooter romp, Alien Trilogy's 30 levels are loosely based off of the first 3 Alien movies, and features plenty of in-your-face shooter action, and tremendous but sometimes too dark atmosphere as well. The sprite-based xenomorphs may not be as deadly as they are in later shooters based in the Alien universe, as they are pretty much limited to running straight at you and do not climb walls or ceilings for a surprise attack. However, they do move fast and can swarm you in packs. Along with the typical alien enemies, including face-huggers and a new dog alien, the game also throws human and synthetic enemies your way. And if you want more Aliens action on your PS1, Alien Resurrection is also worth a look. Since I referenced Doom a lot in covering the 2 previous games, I figured I may as well suggest what is the best home console port of id Software's classic first-person shooter in the 90s. This custom PlayStation edition of Doom features levels from the original Doom and Doom 2. How many levels when compared to the PC versions? I really cannot say, as I am far from a Doom expert. However, what I can say is this PlayStation port is less a direct port of Doom and would best be described as Doom Remix, as some changes have been made, like adding colored lighting, a new moody ambient soundtrack, nixing the MIDI compositions of the PC original, and even adding some Doom 2 enemies into the original Doom. As far as what other changes have been made in minute detail, I am not really sure. But the thing the PS1 version keeps from the PC version is that thrilling combat feel in a buttery smooth frame rate. While I cannot comment on the Jaguar, 3DO, or Saturn versions of Doom, the feel of the PS1 port versus the Super Nintendo and 32X versions, which I also own, is almost night and day. While both of those versions are still fun, as Doom in every version is always fun, the sheer speed and freedom of movement in the PS1 version puts it in a class of its own. And I would say, if not quite on par, then close to par to the feel of the PC original. This port really is that good. And if Doom interests you, then the PS1 port of Final Doom is also a no-brainer. Oh, and I also forgot to mention that the PS1 version of Doom also supports 2-player co-op and 2-player deathmatch through the use of a link cable. 2 TVs, 2 PlayStations, 2 copies of Doom, and 1 cable connecting them. The Unholy War comes to us from the developers of the cult classic Star Control series, and is a mixture of a turn-based strategy and fighting game.
The cyborg race known as the Technos have invaded the home planet of the Arcanes, a biological-based civilization of humans, wizards, lizards, and more. 500 years of this endless unholy war have raged in this ultimate clash of technology versus flesh. Advanced weaponry versus magic. Who will win in the end?
Well, I guess whichever side you choose to play through the game with. The Unholy War is split between 2 play modes, Mayhem mode and Strategy mode. Mayhem mode is your straight-up fighting game mode, which plays out like what other fighting games would dub a team battle, where, in a King of the Hill style, the losing character is eliminated, and the winning character fights the next character of their opponent's choosing. The battle system itself is a fresh take on one-on-one fighting, and sees characters running around various 3D environments while launching projectiles at one another or using close-range attacks. The attacks available for each character are dependent upon a power gauge that fills up with time, making for a more strategic feel and preventing the spamming of the overpowered attacks. The stages themselves have their own unique features as well. Some have teleports and jump pads, while others have environmental hazards. The developers took their time to make each stage feel different from one another. I do wish the fights would last a little longer, as it feels like they sometimes end just as they're getting started. Also, At first, it seems like there is a character imbalance, as some characters can pull off some cheap, quick life-draining moves, or flying characters will fly off the stage and pelt you with long-range attacks from afar. However, part of the learning curve in the game is finding out which character types are best suited for fighting the other character types. For example, a slow-moving, powerful brawler may work great in battle against a similar character, but has no chance against a fast-moving, flying character, as they are more suited for close to medium-range battle. It is best to take out a flyer with another flyer, or even a tank with long-range ground-to-air missiles. Once you learn your character's strengths and weaknesses, the battles become more balanced. However, even then, there are still some cheap life-draining attacks, but they become more manageable.
Target eliminated.
The strategy mode is the main meat of the game, and the most unique feature of the Unholy War. Players face off against the computer or against a friend in maps made up of hexagonal tiles on a quest to destroy their opponent's base. Each map has special tiles on it that serve as our deposits. Not ore deposits, but our deposits. Where landing on and keeping one of your warriors on these tiles earns the player R with each turn of play. R can be used to buy new units from your base, or to use each character's special abilities on the map screen. For example, some characters can heal other friendly units, others can spawn a clone of themselves, and some can even hit opponents with long-range attacks. In strategy mode, when one character moves to an adjoining hex as their opponent's character, Mayhem mode begins, and players are thrust into battle against their opponent. If the attacker wins, they take over the opponent's hex, but if they lose, their opponent stays on the hex. Each hex on the map represents a different stage to battle in, and as the strategy mode is turn-based, each player gets 3 actions before their opponent gets a turn. Strategy mode starts out slow, but after the first few battles where team bases come into play, becomes incredibly addictive. Add in the strategic placement of your units over our deposits on each map, and the ability to buy new units mixed with each character's special abilities, and the element of choosing the right matchup of characters to face your opponent's characters with, and you have an addictive formula with a lot more strategic depth to it than it appears to have on the surface. Crystal Dynamics really did a bang-up job of mixing turn-based strategy and fighting games. Graphically, by PS1 standards, the game looks great. I still say that pound for pound, Crystal Dynamics was possibly the most talented developer when it came to making pretty 3D engines for the PS1. The visuals are clean and have an admirable amount of textural detail, and the effects look great as well. I'm not sure if the Unholy War is another Gex engine game, but the trailer for Akuji the Heartless and the playable, albeit very short and very early demo of Soul Reaver, which I first played on the same official US PlayStation Magazine demo disc that I first played the demo of Metal Gear Solid, you know, the issue that had Spyro on the cover, tell me there is a possibility of this also being a Gex engine game. An engine I still say was probably the best looking 3D engine on the PS1. Crash Warped and Metal Gear Solid aside, the controls are super responsive and have no issues, and the music fits the action well. The only problem I have with the music is that due to how fast the fights are over with, You barely have time to take it in. The sound effects are also fitting and well done.
Target eliminated.
Overall, the Unholy War is a unique mixture of fighting and strategy that works wonderfully. Not even the over too quickly fights and the sometimes cheap attacks should deter you from enjoying this unique hybrid. And hey, if you get tired of fighting the computer, invite a friend over for mayhem or strategy trash talking. The game that reminds me the most of the Unholy War is a game later published by LucasArts called Wrath Unleashed, which I own on the Xbox. However, in the realm of the PS1, I chose two fighting games that have similar traits to the Unholy War. Distrega is another alternative style one-on-one fighting game that sees players free running around 3D environments while shooting projectiles or using close-range attacks against their opponents. The cast of characters is a bit generic overall, as most of the game characters seem to be genre stereotypes. Ninja character? Check. Guy in gi? Check. Guy in armor with swords? Check as well. The in-game voice acting is as bad as the character selection is generic. In fact, it's so bad, it's just bad. Presentation aside, the gameplay is fresh and fun, and Distrega is definitely a game you want to play against a friend, one-on-one. Another cool feature of the game is a pretty in-depth story mode. Though the story elements are terribly acted, and if you listen closely, you will even hear the voice of the guy who would later go on to play Titus in Final Fantasy X.
Then you leave me no choice. Cougar, take care of any stragglers. This poor lout is mine.
The story mode is still the most unique feature in Distrega, and will keep you playing the longest. If you look past the bad acting and the bland character designs, Distrega is a fun and unique fighting game that is definitely worth a look. I have heard Trap Gunner described as having almost a Bomberman feel in its 3D fighting, and there is a similar sense, in the fact that Trap Gunner has players running around 3D environments and setting traps for their opponents to fall into. The game has close range and projectile attacks with which to pelt your opponents with as well, but the core gameplay revolves around cleverly setting traps for your opponents to trip and take damage from. Really talented players can set up their traps into trap combos for even more damage. You can also enter caution mode in order to find and disarm your opponent's traps by putting in a button combination. There are also various power-ups that are lifted into the arenas at random. Things like extra traps for your trap inventory, health, and even a big cannon called the Unit, which shoots a powerful projectile that follows your opponent. Trap Gunner's unique gameplay sets it apart. The mechanic of strategically setting and disarming traps all in the pressure of a real-time fight give it a really fun intensity. This one is unique and was completely overlooked, meaning that this underrated gem is definitely worth a look. And there you have it, version 4 of 5 PS1 games worth playing. This one took me over a year, almost 2 years, maybe 2 years, I don't remember when I put up version 3. But it took me a very long time to get to. Furthermore, this video took me a very long time to make. From the time that you see the beginning of the video with the Misadventures of Tron Bonne footage, to the end of the video, at least a month of my life has passed. I've been incredibly busy. So I hope you enjoyed the video. It took me a very long time to get to because life has been crazy. And also, one last thing. If you always notice whenever I do the storyline segments where I'm describing to you the storyline, I always tend to do it in a goofy voice. Now, am I doing this because I'm trying to be entertaining? No. Have you ever read video game storylines? They are so cheesy that I would actually feel goofier if I tried to tell you the storylines in a serious voice, as opposed to some goofy voice, because, especially from the PS1 era, they were just really cheesy. They almost require you to say them in a different voice, it's just, that's why. It's not a thing where I think I'm being funny for and entertaining for everyone else. It's just, I just can't be serious whenever the storylines are that goofy. But anyway, I thank you for watching.
The opinions expressed in this video are those of 2D Gamer and do not necessarily represent
The opinions of anyone else. Thank you for watching. 2D Gamer signing out.
And the villagers? Why did you kill them? For harboring you. It is a crime punishable by death.